Hello and welcome back to An Old Man Watches, where today I'm going to be talking about Roger Corman's sleazy, schlocky 1995 superhero movie Black Scorpion. The film begins with a police detective telling his young daughter Darcy the parable of the scorpion and the frog. In case you haven't heard that, the short version of it is that a scorpion asks a frog to carry her over a river. The frog is afraid of being stung during the trip, but the scorpion argues, well, if I sting you, we're both going to sink and I will drown. So the frog agrees to carry the scorpion across the river and begins doing so. But halfway across the river, the scorpion stings the frog. The frog, as it begins to sink, says, "But why? You're gonna drown too." And the scorpion says, "It's my nature." With this less than cheery bedtime story out of the way, the father rushes off to chase some criminals. 20 years later, Darcy, who is the movie's main character, has herself become a police officer. She's working undercover to catch a serial killer who is murdering prostitutes. The operation goes awry, however. Firstly, because Darcy tends to take too many risks, and secondly, because her partner tends to be overprotective and cautious. Our heroine is not in the best of moods then, and this is not improved when her father is murdered in bizarre circumstances. Darcy threatens the perpetrator with a gun, gets herself suspended as a result, and decides that it is time to take the law into her own hands. She dons a leathery dominatrix-style getup, finagles her way into owning some implausible high-tech crime-fighting gadgets, and hits the streets to forge her own kind of justice. The Black Scorpion is here, and criminals will live in fear. Or not live, because, to be frank, Black Scorpion not terribly concerned about keeping her suspects alive. Now, the cops aren't thrilled by the new vigilante on their streets, particularly when she starts to rack up that body count. And our heroine, quote unquote, must pursue her crusade while also dodging her former colleagues. And of course, every superhero needs a supervillain. Unknown to Black Scorpion, the mysterious, heavily armoured figure of the Breathtaker is lurking in the shadows with his army of... Well, I'm not going to spoil what he's got an army of. Suffice to say that it's both very silly and definitely on brand. This film was based on an original idea by Roger Corman, which he developed with writer Craig J. Nevius. Corman has been quoted as saying, "I wanted to do a female Superman, Spider-Man, Batman," which suggests to me that he was either dodging the use of the word superhero for legal reasons, it's technically a trademark term, or that he just didn't know any other costumed heroes, which is quite possible too, I guess. Whatever his familiarity with superhero comics, Corman was clear on what he wanted for his leading actor. She had to be tall, so she could believably fight crooks, with a good figure, because he's Roger Corman, and a good actress. Corman put it as not Meryl Streep, just a good actress. Because even Corman realizes you need to make some effort when it comes to your lead. Now, the search for a leading lady proved more difficult than Corman expected. I can only surmise from this that he hadn't read the script. I doubt too many good actors read the trashy plot and cheesy dialogue and thought, finally, the challenge my skill deserves. Because, let's be clear, this is a trashy, sleazy, cheesy film. It's not good on any technical metric. The action scenes are not terribly well executed. It's packed with sometimes deliberately groan-worthy dialogue. And as we'll discuss later, it has some seriously problematic elements. But despite all that, I rather enjoyed Black Scorpion, so let's talk about why that might be. So in the 1990s, superhero comic books attempted to grow their audience out of the 4 kids enclosure. Alas, they chose the most immature approach to this possible, a large escalation in the violence and ruthlessness of all characters, but especially the heroes, again, putting that in inverted quotes. It was a decade filled with hard people making hard choices, usually while gritting their teeth a lot and for some reason wearing a bunch of pouches on their costumes. Black Scorpion is very much a product of its time. There's a lot of talk about doing what's necessary to clean up the streets and how rules and regulations stop cops from doing their jobs, a problematic message that's common in media even today. And of course, there's the fact that our main character is very quick to resort to lethal force. On the other hand, 90s comic books were often, with a few notable exceptions, fairly joyless affairs, lacking anything but the most cynical and jaded of humour. Black Scorpion, meanwhile, in some ways feels a lot more like something like Knight Rider, if you replaced Michael Knight with a dominatrix and gave the show a big injection of sex and violence. Our superhero and heroine here even has a magical high-tech car. It doesn't talk, but it does practically everything else. The film also steals liberally from the 1960s Batman TV show, with a lot of the same camp elements. It has the same love of groan-worthy, pun-heavy dialogue, and the same tendency towards rather goofy fight scenes. It even has the old "a cage falls from the ceiling on top of our heroine" kind of trap. So all in all, the film's a rather odd mishmash of tones and styles. It's goofy and silly, but also trying to be very po-faced and prim and grim. It's trying to show some female empowerment themes while being wildly and, to some extent, largely unconsciously sexist. It's throwing a whole lot of stuff at the wall and hoping some of it sticks. Alas, among all the stuff being thrown at the wall are plenty of problematic elements. I've already noted that the movie is pretty heavily invested in that toxic criminals are flourishing because the police are handicapped by rules rhetoric. Compounding with that is the blithe treatment of Black Scorpion as a heroic figure whose cause is good and methods inherently justified. These methods are, after all, frequently lethal. Killing people is a crime. But when the police try to catch the murderous vigilante, the film positions this as another example of societal dysfunction, rather than the appropriate response to illegal acts of homicide. Even more problematically, in her guise of Black Scorpion, Darcy basically sexually assaults her partner on the force. He ultimately doesn't remember this event because of hand-wavy plot elements, and the film seems to believe that that excuses Darcy of any guilt or repercussions or consequences, which it doesn't. She still did the crime. And yet, despite the wildly inconsistent tone and the problematic elements, I found myself enjoying this movie. Yes, it's something of a guilty pleasure, because ultimately it's not actually a well-made movie, but it's got the brash exuberance of some of Corman's better works. And for all that Joan Severance really can't throw a convincing punch as the leading character, she's otherwise got the swagger for the title role. So despite its many flaws, the film is ultimately schlocky fun. And it's proved successful enough that a sequel was produced 2 years later. That film sees the black-clad vigilante, played by Severance again, tangle with the malevolent gangster prankster, a tiresome and tediously funny parody/homage of the Joker, as well as the dangerous eco-warrior Aftershock. The latter character is motivated primarily by a desire for revenge against the city's mayor, who chose to embezzle the funds allocated for her pioneering earthquake prediction equipment. The parallels between Aftershock and Black Scorpion herself should be obvious. They were both perceive themselves as wronged by the system and are striking out to get their own form of justice. But presumably because A, more people will be hurt in Aftershock's revenge, and B, it was a white-collar crime, the film decides that Aftershock's a villain, not a vigilante. Alas, the sequel lacks the wacky charm of the original. It's much more overtly trying to be a comedy, and paradoxically, that makes it much less funny. The original Black Scorpion had goofy stuff in it, but it never stopped to mug for the camera and point this out. The sequel constantly seems to flag its own silliness to the audience, which in my opinion robs the experience of much of its charm. It's not helped by clearly being shot on an even lower budget. A car chase scene and some other effects are clearly directly reused from the original movie, for instance, and there is more static and limited use of the camera, probably to simplify and speed up the shoot and minimise set and location costs. Although the sequel wasn't well received, Roger Corman wasn't quite done with Black Scorpion. And so, next time, Black Scorpion, the TV series. Released in 2001, it consists of no less than 22 episodes, almost all of which are terrible, and absolutely all of which I was foolish enough to sit through. And now you get to share the pain. But that's next time. Until then, thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you've seen today's movie, let me know what you thought of it.